Welcome back to Goosebump on the Midnight series, where the most terrifying haunted stories are told. Our tale today is the Solace Manor. The Solace Manor, a name that evokes a sense of peace, yet conceals a living hell. Let us turn the blood-soaked pages of a diary and lift the veil on the horrifying secrets of one of the most terrifyingly rumored mansions in the misty hills of Blackwood Creek. The story follows Ethan Vance, a talented architecture student perpetually tormented by guilt following the death of his younger sister, Lily. His graduate thesis is merely an excuse for Ethan to hunt for Solace Manor, a forgotten structure, a place he believes may hold the answer to his pain. Accompanying him are Josh Carter, the daring vlogger from the channel The Na.k.e.d Truth, who always tries to debunk supernatural phenomena with science, and Mia, Ethan's sensitive girlfriend, who has had ominous premonitions about the trip from the very beginning through ghostly dreams. Ignoring all warnings, the three young friends venture straight into Solace Manor, a place where time has stopped and the air is thick with the stench of neglect, decay, and death. They don't know that their curiosity has awakened an entity born of madness, a collective consciousness nurtured by the pain, fear, and despair of dozens of innocent victims. What do they find inside the mansion? Portraits with their faces clawed out. A mournful piano playing from the void. The voice of a child, pleading in French in desperate tones, Maman. Peur. Mom. I'm scared. A secret cellar beneath the doctor's study, a literal human slaughterhouse with an operating table, torture instruments, and countless scratch marks on the stone walls. And most importantly, they find the diary of the last housekeeper. It not only chronicles the tragedy of Dr. Laurent's family after the death of his daughter, Elise, but also exposes a far more horrific truth. The ritual of atonement was not for salvation, but to resurrect a demon by sacrificing countless lives, including his own wife. Trapped underground, tormented by the deepest pains of their own souls, the three friends must face a grim choice: surrender to fear and become the next meal, or fight to reclaim their lives. What is the price of survival? Is the nightmare truly over when they leave Solace Manor? Or have they unwittingly carried a part of it with them, a seed of tragedy, waiting to begin a new cycle? Prepare yourself to delve into a horrifying tale where the lines between reality and illusion, past and present, sin and salvation are completely blurred. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next thrilling stories. The computer screen cast a cold, artificial light onto Ethan Vance's sharp features. Outside, the campus of the Architecture University was lit up, bustling with the laughter of souls just freed from their lecture halls. But in his small corner of the digital library, Ethan's world had shrunk to the size of a 24-inch frame, where the lines of the past were re-emerging with haunting clarity. He wasn't searching for the future in glamorous 3D renderings. He was excavating the past in black and white photographs and documents covered in the dust of time. Ethan's graduate thesis had a rather grand title: The Intersection of French Colonial Architecture and Local Folk Beliefs in the Highlands of Vietnam. It was a name long enough to impress the review board, but for Ethan, it was just an excuse. An excuse to immerse himself in forgotten structures, places where time had stopped, where old stories still whispered from every brick and every door crack. His finger glided over the mouse, stopping on a nearly forgotten folder in the archives of a French photographer. Indochine, projets abandons. Indochina, abandoned projects. And then he saw it. The photograph was blurry, faded to a sickly yellow, but its pull was undeniable. A two-story mansion stood grimly on a barren hill, surrounded by a silent pine forest. Its architecture was strange, a forced blend of the graceful charm of a Normandy resort and the sharp, harsh lines of a fortress. The dark tiled roof seemed to scowl under the gray sky. The tall, arched windows were pitch black, like empty eye sockets staring directly at the viewer. Below the photo, a handwritten note in French, Villa de la Paix. Dalat. 1932, Dr. Laurent. Villa de la Paix. Villa of Peace. But there was nothing peaceful in the way it looked at him. It possessed a funereal beauty, a suffocating stillness. Ethan unconsciously reached out and touched the screen, as if to feel the coldness of those stone walls. Solace Manor. He muttered the Americanized name people later gave it, a name he'd read in a brief news clipping about haunted places in the region. Solace. The word was like a needle, piercing the wound in Ethan's heart that had never healed. Lily. His sister's name. Lily Vance. She had been lost to the deep blue waters of the lake one summer afternoon 5 years ago. The afternoon when he, her 17-year-old brother, had been careless, engrossed in a video game, and let her run out onto the dock alone. He could still hear her final scream, her desperate cry of Ethan. Swallowed by the water. Guilt, like a toxic vine, had wrapped itself around his heart since that day, strangling all joy, casting a gray pall over his life. Solace. Ethan repeated, a bitter smile on his lips. A place of peace. Was that where his sister had gone? Or was this just a cruel trick of fate? Find anything cool, Professor? A booming voice pulled Ethan back to reality. Josh Carter, with his smoke-colored highlighted hair and oversized hoodie, had appeared behind him at some point. Josh clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder and peered at the screen. Whoa, another haunted house. Josh smirked. Looks pretty legit. Where is it? We could do a Na.k.e.d Truth special this weekend. The Na.k.e.d Truth was Josh's vlog channel. A channel dedicated to visiting rumored haunted places and abandoned sites, using a slew of cheap electronic gadgets to prove that everything was just the wind, natural noises, or people's imaginations. Ironically, it was Josh's half-believing, half-mocking attitude that attracted a considerable audience. He was a pragmatist disguised as a man of science. It's not a haunted house, Ethan snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. This is a valuable piece of architecture. I'm researching it for my thesis. A thesis or a ghost story? Josh winked. Come on, I know you're curious too. Look at the way you're staring at it. Solace Manor in the Blackwood Creek Hills, right? I've heard the rumors. A piano playing at midnight, the ghost of a girl in a white dress gliding through the hallways. Classic. So classic. Josh pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Let's see. Ah, here it is. Legend of a French doctor's daughter who died of an illness, her spirit never found peace, blah blah. All old tropes. But the views would be insane. Imagine the title, Fearless Vlogger Challenges French Ghost Doctor, and the shocking conclusion. I can already smell the ad revenue. Ethan said nothing, his eyes still glued to the mansion. Josh might see money, views, and fame. But Ethan saw something else. He saw an invitation. A strange resonance between his own pain and the sorrowful beauty of that place. He had a feeling that Solace Manor was not just a pile of inanimate bricks and stones. It was waiting. Waiting for him. The small apartment Ethan and Mia shared was on the 4th floor of an old building. It was tiny but always neat and cozy, thanks to Mia's touch. When Ethan got home, Mia was busy in the kitchen, the aroma of simmering stew filling the air, a scent of ordinary peace that Ethan sometimes felt he didn't deserve. "You're home," Mia said, turning to smile at him. Her smile was like a warm ray of sunshine, capable of chasing away the dark clouds in Ethan's heart. "I made your favorite." Ethan walked over and hugged her from behind, burying his face in her long, silky hair, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo. Only with Mia did the vine of guilt loosen its grip, just a little. "How was your day at the university?" Mia asked, her hand still stirring the pot. "The usual," Ethan replied. "Ah. I found a pretty interesting place for my thesis." He tried to keep his voice as normal as possible, but Mia, with the sensitivity of a longtime lover, immediately sensed something was off. Dinner was a quiet affair. Ethan told Mia about Solace Manor, about its architecture and its vague history. He deliberately omitted the ghostly legends Josh had mentioned. But just hearing the name Solace and seeing the unusual excitement in her boyfriend's eyes sent a chill down Mia's spine. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Mia opened his laptop. The browser history was still there. Solace Manor. Legends of Solace Manor. Dr. Laurent Blackwood Creek. She clicked on a link, and the black and white photograph appeared. Immediately, Mia felt a wave of nausea. The house in the photo seemed to suck the air out of the room. The dark window sockets seemed to bore deep into her mind. A dull ache started in her head, like an invisible drill boring into her temples. She quickly shut the laptop, but the image of the mansion was already seared into her brain. That night, Mia dreamed. She saw herself walking down an endless hallway. The walls on either side were peeling and damp, hung with portraits whose faces had been scratched out. Her feet were bare, stepping on the cold wooden floor, which made eerie creaking sounds. At the end of the hallway, an old piano appeared dimly. And then, the music began. Not a complete melody, but disjointed, mournful notes, like the sobbing of a child. The music grew louder, more frantic, more insane, drilling into her ears, into her brain. Mia wanted to cover her ears, wanted to scream, but her body was frozen. She could only walk on, towards the ghostly sound. As she neared the piano, the music abruptly stopped. A small figure was sitting there with its back to her. Mia knew it was a child. She could feel an infinite sadness radiating from it. She was about to speak when the figure slowly turned around. Mia couldn't see its face. Where the face should have been was only a dark, empty void. Mia shot up in bed, her back drenched in sweat. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Ethan was sleeping soundly beside her, his breathing even. Outside the window, the night was silent. But in her head, the mournful piano music still echoed. The next morning, she told Ethan about the dream. "You were probably just spooked by the photo last night," Ethan said, buttering a slice of toast. But he avoided her eyes. He knew it wasn't just a dream. "Ethan, I'm begging you," Mia said, taking his hand, her voice trembling. "Don't go there. I have a very bad feeling. That place. It doesn't want us there." "Mia, it's just an old house," Ethan tried to reassure her. "I'll just go, take a few pictures, note the architecture, and come back. Josh will be with me. It'll be fine." "Josh." Mia frowned. "If he's going, then it's even more of a reason not to. You know what he'll do. He'll provoke whatever's there just to get footage for his vlog." "It'll be fine. I promise," Ethan said, but his promise sounded weak. His gaze was distant, looking past Mia, past the small room, towards the misty hill where Solace Manor was waiting. Conflict tore at him. On one side was love, the worry in Mia's eyes. On the other was the obsession, the irresistible pull of a place that felt connected to his sister. And in the end, as always, guilt won. He felt he owed Lily something, a search, a confrontation. And Solace Manor, somehow, seemed to be the answer. Ethan's determination was solidified when, 2 days later, he found something even more valuable than the photographs. On a long-dead forum about local history, in a post by an anonymous member, he read an excerpt. "Rumor has it that the last housekeeper of Solace Manor, a man named Arthur, left behind a journal before he fled. It is said to contain not only records of daily events, but also the doctor's terrible secrets. They say Arthur wrote down a ritual of atonement, a way to appease the spirits trapped in the mansion." The post ended with an open question: has anyone ever found that journal? A ritual of atonement. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Atonement. Wasn't that what he had yearned for these past 5 years? Though his rational mind screamed that this was superstitious nonsense, the part of his soul eroded by guilt clung to it like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. He immediately sent a screenshot to Josh. 5 minutes later, Josh called back, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Holy crap, Ethan. This is a goldmine. A golden script. The ritual of atonement at Solace Manor. That sounds like a whole series. We have to go. Right now." It was decided. Mia, though her heart was breaking with worry, finally had to accept it. She couldn't let Ethan go alone with Josh. If something happened, she had to be there, by his side. Saturday. The city was sweltering. Josh's old pickup truck was packed with gear. Besides their backpacks, there was a vlogger's entire arsenal: 2 professional cameras, a drone, a few GoPros, audio recorders, an EMF meter, high-powered flashlights, and a large bag of spare batteries. Ready for the trip of a lifetime? Josh grinned, putting on his sunglasses, looking like a rock star about to take the stage. Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. Mia sat silently in the back seat, pulling a scarf tightly around her neck despite the heat. The truck rolled out, leaving the bustling city behind. The further they drove towards the highlands, the cooler the air became. The tall buildings receded, replaced by vast forests and coffee plantations. And then, the fog began to appear. At first, it was just thin wisps drifting across the hillsides. But as the truck began to climb the winding mountain roads, the fog grew thick, as white as milk. It swallowed the road, the scenery, and even the sunlight. Josh had to turn on the fog lights and slow down. The silence was eerie, broken only by the steady hum of the engine and the sound of tires on the wet pavement. Mia looked out the window. The fog wrapped around the truck like a giant shroud. She could see nothing but a hazy, milky white. The feeling of unease within her grew stronger. They weren't just driving to the highlands. They were entering another world, a place where the boundary between life and death, reality and illusion, was blurred. In that fog, she felt as if the empty eye sockets of Solace Manor were watching them, patiently and eagerly, waiting for them to arrive and begin its tragic play. The fog on the mountain pass was just the prelude. As the pickup truck entered the Blackwood Creek area, the entire town seemed to be submerged in a sea of white mist. The pale yellow lights of the town were blurred and surreal. The air was cold and damp, carrying the scent of earth, pine needles, and something ancient and decayed. The trail leading up the hill to Solace Manor wasn't on any digital map. Ethan had to navigate using an old hand-drawn map he'd found on the forum. The road was narrow and rough, made bumpy by protruding pine roots. Branches on both sides scraped against the truck with a scratching sound, like skeletal fingers trying to claw and hold them back. The truck groaned, struggling up each incline. "You sure this is the right way?" Josh asked, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "If we get lost and eaten by bears, this whole series is a bust." "I'm sure," Ethan said firmly, his eyes fixed on the hazy road ahead. "Another 500 yards and we should see the gate." Mia said nothing. She was huddled in the back seat, her hands clasped tightly. The dull headache had returned, and she felt the air outside growing thicker, harder to breathe. The fog no longer felt like a natural phenomenon, it felt like the breath of some colossal creature enveloping them. And then, it appeared. The truck rounded a bend, and Solace Manor suddenly materialized from the mist, standing grimly at the end of the road. It was larger, more imposing, and far more sinister than in the photograph. The stone walls were a damp, mossy gray. The dark slate roof was jagged, broken in places, revealing pitch-black voids like open wounds. Wild ivy had climbed more than halfway up the walls, its dark green leaves looking like dried bloodstains in the dim twilight. The entire garden was wild, with grass growing waist-high and headless stone angels leaning amidst piles of rotting leaves. But the most terrifying feature was still the windows. They were dark, soulless, and all of them seemed to be staring in unison at the truck, at the three strangers who had just violated its decades-long silence. Josh turned off the engine. A sudden silence fell, so heavy it made their ears ring. Not a bird chirped, not an insect buzzed. There was only the sound of the wind whistling through the pine needles like a mournful sigh. "Wow," Josh breathed, breaking the silence. His usual wide grin was a bit forced. "It's grander than I imagined. It'll look amazing on camera." He tried to act professional, grabbing a camera. "Okay team. Josh Carter here, and we are standing in front of the legendary Solace Manor. Look at this, the atmosphere here is just thick with spookiness." He panned the camera as he spoke, but his voice had an unconcealed tremor. Ethan stepped out of the truck, as if mesmerized. He didn't see the spookiness Josh mentioned. He saw an infinite sadness, an absolute loneliness emanating from the mansion. It was like an old, tired giant, huddled on the hilltop, gnawing on its painful memories. The tall iron gate was rusted, its heavy chain and padlock lying uselessly on the ground. Ethan and Josh used all their strength to push one side of the gate open just enough for a person to squeeze through. The gate groaned with a long, mournful screech, as if protesting the intrusion. Mia took a deep breath, trying to suppress the nausea rising in her throat, and followed her friends. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, a sudden blast of cold air hit her, as if they had just stepped from summer into winter. She shivered, pulling her scarf tighter. They stood before the main door, made of heavy oak. It wasn't locked. Ethan only needed to push it lightly, and it creaked open slowly, revealing a dark and silent space within. The smell of oblivion wafted out. The smell of dust, of rotting wood, of damp old books, and somewhere, a faint, acrid smell, like antiseptic in a hospital. They stepped inside. The main hall was vast, with a soaring ceiling. The weak light from outside was not enough to dispel the darkness that reigned within. In the center was a massive wooden staircase, curving like the spine of a monster, leading up to the second floor and disappearing into the gloom. All the furniture, sofas, tables, chairs, was covered in white sheets, looking like ghosts sitting silently in eternal slumber. "Awesome," Josh whispered, his eyes gleaming. "Even a Hollywood set couldn't beat this." He switched on his camera light, a powerful beam sweeping across the room, making countless dust motes dance frantically. The light beam landed on the wall opposite the staircase, where a large portrait hung. It was a portrait of a family of three, a European man with a stern gaze, a beautiful woman with a sad expression, and a little girl of about 7 or 8 with cute pigtails. But the faces of all three had been scratched out by something sharp, leaving only a mess of black, crisscrossing lines. Mia let out a small cry and stepped back. These were the portraits from her dream. "Probably just some kids messing around," Josh said quickly, though he felt a chill himself. He started walking around, placing small GoPro cameras at strategic corners. One in the hall, one pointing up the stairs, one in the living room. Ethan paid no attention to Josh. He walked towards the old piano in the corner of the living room, covered in a thick layer of dust. He ran his fingers over the cracked, yellowed ivory keys. Silence. He could imagine its mournful sound, the music that had haunted Mia in her dream. "This place is strangely well preserved," Ethan said, his voice thoughtful. "Abandoned for decades, but the structure is almost entirely intact. The ironwood isn't termite-eaten. The walls aren't very damp. It's as if it doesn't want to decay." Mia finished, her voice trembling. "As if it's waiting." Ethan looked at Mia, seeing the genuine fear in her eyes. He walked over and took her hand. Her hand was ice cold. "It's okay. I'm here." Suddenly, from upstairs, a sharp click echoed. All three of them flinched, falling silent, looking up at the deep darkness where the staircase led. "Just the wind," Josh stammered, raising his EMF meter. The needle on the device remained still. See? No electromagnetic fluctuations. It's just an old house, the wood is settling. But they all knew it wasn't the wind. It was a clear, deliberate sound. Like a lock had just been opened. Mia squeezed Ethan's hand. I hear something. What is it? Ethan asked softly. I don't know, Mia whispered, her eyes fixed on the darkness upstairs. It's like the rustle of fabric. And a piano. Ethan and Josh strained their ears. There was only a dead silence. Mia, you're just tired, you're hearing things, Ethan said, trying to sound calm. There's no piano. Yes, there is. It's very faint, but I hear it. Mia insisted, her voice on the verge of tears. It's just like in my dream. Josh lowered his camera, looking at Mia with concern. Maybe we should go back to the car for a bit. Get some fresh air. He suggested, his own vlogger's courage clearly being tested. But Ethan shook his head. His obsession was greater than his fear. We're already here. I want to look around a bit before it gets completely dark. He pulled out his flashlight, took Mia's hand, and started walking towards the staircase. We'll go together. Josh hesitated for a second, then switched on his own flashlight and followed with his camera. He couldn't miss this valuable footage, no matter what he had to face. They ascended the wooden stairs, step by step. The creaking echoed in the silent space, as if counting down their fate. The higher they went, the colder the air became. Mia felt her headache intensify, and the piano music in her head grew clearer, a fragmented, lost, and sorrowful melody. The second floor was a long hallway, flanked by closed doors. At the end of the hall, a large window looked out onto the pine forest behind the mansion. The last light of day cast a dim rectangle on the floor, highlighting the floating dust particles. Dr. Laurent's study must be the largest room, Ethan said, his voice echoing in the hallway. He pointed to the last door on the right. As they approached it, Mia suddenly stopped, pulling Ethan's arm. Don't, she whispered. Don't open that door. Why? I have a very bad feeling. Someone is in there, waiting for us. Just then, the EMF meter in Josh's hand suddenly shrieked with a loud series of beeps. Its needle jumped up and spun wildly. Damn it! Josh yelped, nearly dropping the device. Something's here. The electromagnetic field just spiked. All three stood frozen, their hearts pounding. Their flashlight beams trembled, casting chaotic streaks of light on the old walls. And then, they heard it. This time, it wasn't just Mia. From inside the room at the end of the hall, a piano began to play. Clearly. Distinctly. It was no longer a fragmented tune, but a complete piece. A classical, sorrowful melody, but played with a furious, insane anger, the notes crashing and clawing at the silence of the house. The music grew louder, more urgent, then abruptly stopped. In the ensuing silence, a child's voice, clear but lifeless, spoke from behind the door, just on the other side of the wood. It spoke in French. Maman. J. Mom. I'm scared. The sun had set behind the pine ridges. Darkness swallowed the hallway, swallowed the mansion. The first night at Solace Manor had truly begun. That clear, mournful French phrase was like an ice bullet lodging itself in their brains. It was different from the noises, the piano, or the vague feelings. This was speech. A direct communication from something unseen. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, no one moved, no one dared to breathe. The dark, cold hallway suddenly became as suffocating as a tomb. The flashlight beams in Josh and Ethan's hands trembled violently, creating a frantic dance of light on the grimy walls. Mia was the first to react. She let out a small sob, then, without a word, turned and fled down the stairs. Fear had conquered all restraint. Mia's action was like a signal. Ethan hurriedly followed, grabbing her wrist just as she nearly slipped on the last step. Josh, his face as white as a sheet, stumbled after them, the heavy camera on his shoulder almost slipping from his grasp. They huddled together in the center of the main hall, panting, their backs against each other like cornered animals. They stared up at the deep darkness at the top of the stairs where the sound had come from, holding their breath, waiting for something else to happen. But there was nothing. The house fell back into absolute silence, a silence even more terrifying than the noise. Did you hear that? Ethan whispered to Josh, though he already knew the answer. Clear. As you talking right now, Josh replied, his voice strained. He shakily set the camera on the floor. No way. No way it was fake. The EMF meter, and then the voice. He suddenly stopped, his eyes fixed on the professional audio recorder clipped to his belt. He had turned it on the moment they entered the hallway. With fumbling fingers, he took off his headphones, pressed rewind, and switched to the external speaker. A series of static hisses played, then their creaking footsteps, Mia's whispered voice, the shrieking EMF meter. And then, Maman. J. The little girl's voice came from the recorder speaker, even clearer and closer than when they had heard it live. It was cold, with no background noise, as if the child had leaned in and whispered directly into the microphone. Josh flinched, throwing the recorder to the floor as if it were red hot. It's in the machine. The three of them stared at the inanimate device lying there, now looking like nothing less than a cursed object. The proof was undeniable. What they had just experienced was real. They were not alone in this house. We have to get out of here, Mia said, her voice thick with tears. Right now. I can't stay here another second. Yeah, let's go. Josh agreed instantly. His desire for views and scientific curiosity had completely evaporated, leaving only primal fear. Forget the cameras, forget everything. But as Josh and Mia turned towards the main door, Ethan stopped them. Wait. Wait for what? Are you insane, Ethan? Josh yelled. Didn't you see? This place is really haunted. That's exactly why, Ethan said, his eyes glowing with a strange fire. The fear was still there, but it was being overshadowed by a manic excitement. We can't leave until we understand what's happening. That voice. It was a child's. Maybe it needs our help. Help? Mia looked at Ethan as if he were a stranger. Ethan, it doesn't need help. It wants us to stay here with it. A deafening crash cut Mia off. It wasn't the sound of a door blown by the wind. It was like a small explosion. A door on the second floor had slammed shut with terrifying force, shaking the very floor beneath their feet. Dust rained down from the ceiling. This time, there was no more arguing. Tangible terror choked all reason. They were trapped. An unseen force was playing with them, and it had just demonstrated its ability to physically affect its surroundings. The silence after the slam was even heavier. The three of them stood frozen, sweat pouring down their faces. Ethan felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing his heart. He was the one who had dragged his friends here. He had to get them out. But how? The main door, though unlocked, now felt as distant and terrifying as the gates of hell. In his panic, Ethan's mind started working with a strange clarity. He, the architecture student, began to analyze. The slam came from the end of the left hallway, while the voice had come from the end of the right. It seemed there was more than one entity, or one that could move at impossible speeds. But what drew his attention most was the doctor's study, the room he had pointed out earlier. The room where the voice had come from. His study. Ethan mumbled. "What are you thinking about that for now?" Josh snapped. "Listen to me," Ethan said quickly, trying to control his breathing. "If there are any answers, they have to be at the center of all this. That room. The diary. The ritual of atonement. It all has to be in there." His reason screamed that this was suicide, but a part of him believed that confrontation was the only way. Running would only make them weak prey. He didn't wait for the others to agree. Gripping his flashlight, he turned and walked back towards the stairs. Mia and Josh looked at each other in horror, but the fear of being left alone was greater than the fear of going with him. They hastily grabbed their flashlights and stumbled after him. The second ascent up the stairs was worse than the first. Each step was a trial. They swept their lights everywhere as they walked, terrified that a shadow would emerge from any corner. Luckily, the hallway was still empty. The slammed door was the second one from the start of the left hall, now shut as if sealed. They cautiously moved to the opposite side, towards the last room on the right. The oak door remained closed. No more sound came from within. Ethan took a deep breath, his trembling hand resting on the cold brass doorknob. He turned it. The door was unlocked. It slowly swung open with a sickening creak, revealing Dr. Laurent's study. The room was large, with a big window overlooking the gloomy pine forest. The furniture was still intact, a massive mahogany desk, a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, and a few cracked leather armchairs. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but the air in the room had a different smell. It was still the scent of antiseptic, but much stronger and more unpleasant this time. Josh raised the EMF meter. This time, it was silent. They stepped in cautiously, their flashlight beams probing every corner. Ethan went straight to the bookshelf. Hundreds of leather-bound medical books, mostly in French and German. He pulled one out. The pages were yellowed and brittle. "Nothing here," Josh said, after shining his light under the desk and behind the curtains. Mia stood still in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. "I feel. It's very cold right here," she said, pointing to an empty patch of floor near the bookshelf. Ethan approached. He knelt down and knocked lightly on the wooden floor. The sound everywhere else was a solid thud, but in the spot Mia pointed to, it was a hollow thump. He shone his flashlight closely. Most of the floorboards were tightly fitted, but here, one board seemed to have a clearer outline. He tried to pry it with his fingernail. It didn't move. "Josh, let me borrow your multi-tool." Josh dug in his pocket and handed it over. Ethan carefully inserted the knife's tip into the crack and pried. The floorboard popped up with surprising ease. Underneath was not dirt, but a black, rusty metal ring. A handle for a trapdoor. Their hearts stopped. Ethan and Josh looked at each other, then together they put their hands through the ring and pulled hard. A large rectangular section of the floor lifted slowly with the grinding creak of wood, revealing a dark hole and a narrow, steep stone staircase leading down into the earth. A blast of frigid air, carrying the smell of dampness, earth, and the foul odor of something decomposing, hit them in the face. It was so overwhelming that Mia had to cover her mouth to keep from gagging. This was it. The secret cellar. Fear warred violently with curiosity inside Ethan. He knew that once he went down there would be no turning back. But the diary, the answer to everything, was almost certainly down there. "I'm going down," he said, his voice firm. "You two stay up here." "No," Mia and Josh said almost in unison. Being left up here, in the waiting darkness and silence, was even more terrifying. "We're going with you." Ethan nodded. He went first, shining his flashlight down the slippery steps. Josh followed, panning his camera into the darkness as he went. Mia was last, not daring to look down, just clinging tightly to Josh's shirt. The staircase was deeper than they thought. The air grew colder and thicker. The sound of dripping water echoed, a steady, monotonous. That grated on their nerves. Finally, Ethan's feet touched the damp earth. He was standing in a pitch-black space. He swept his flashlight in a circle. And his stomach churned. They were in a stone cellar, not very large, but its contents were truly horrifying. In the center of the cellar was a rusty metal operating table, its surface still bearing dark brown stains. Old leather restraints were attached to its sides. A nearby cart was filled with medical instruments that looked like tools of torture, pliers, scalpels of various sizes, a bone saw, and giant glass syringes. But the most horrific thing was the walls. All 4 stone walls were covered in scratch marks. Not just a few marks, but hundreds, thousands of deep, overlapping scratches. The marks of ultimate pain and despair. The marks of people who had been trapped here, who had hopelessly tried to claw their way through the stone to find an escape. "Oh my God!" Josh gasped, lowering his camera. This scene was beyond his imagination. Mia broke down crying, her sobs catching in her throat. She didn't dare to look directly, just buried her face in Josh's back. Ethan, though horrified, tried to remain calm. He slowly swept his flashlight, scanning every detail. His goal was the diary. It had to be here. The housekeeper wouldn't have hidden it in a normal place. His light stopped on a corner of the wall, where a stack of wooden boxes containing empty chemical vials sat. Behind the stack, he saw a stone in the wall that was a slightly different color from the others. He pushed the boxes aside. The stone seemed to be loosely fitted. He used Josh's knife to pry it out. Inside the empty cavity in the wall was a package, carefully wrapped in a piece of old, black oilcloth. With trembling hands, Ethan pulled it out. He carefully unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a worn, tattered leather-bound notebook. The faded writing on the cover was still legible. Arthur's diary. Housekeeper of Solace Manor. 1945. They had found it. The key to deciphering the nightmare. But just as Ethan opened the first page, a freezing gust of wind blew from nowhere, extinguishing the single candle Josh had lit on the operating table. The cellar plunged into thick darkness. At the same moment, the trapdoor above them, their only way out, slammed shut with a deafening, sealing them in the earth with the vengeful spirits